Hi, my name is Madison Thompson. This is my Phylum Project archive for Phylum Chlorophyta, and this is for Biology 102 section 1. Phylum Chlorophyta comes from the Greek words chloros, meaning green, and the Greek word phyta, meaning plant. Organisms in the phylum Chlorophyta are photoautotrophs that use pigment chlorophyll. This is an important distinction from other organisms in the algae, protozoa, etc. kingdom, because they have other pigments that they use, like the diatoms that are yellow and brown. But chlorophyta is particularly known for being filled with green organisms. All of these organisms are aquatic and they can occur in fresh, salt, or brackish water, but they're most common in fresh water. Organisms in chlorophyta reproduce through sporic and zygotic meiosis. So they have multiple methods of reproduction, some of which are sexual and some of which are asexual. Some chlorophyta organisms, such as Spirogyra, have truncated life histories and only proliferate into haploids. This is the same as several other phylums in this kingdom, and not incredibly unique, but still important to note. So Spirogyra is a genus, not a species. We were provided with the genus Spirogyra, but it was difficult to tell what species we were dealing with just because there's so many different ones. The species Spirogyra varians is a commonly identified one. We can't be for sure that that's what it is, but so I wrote varies in my taxonomic information, but it can be generally assumed that it's probably Spirogyra varians. And the common name for this is green algae. This is organism number 7. And Spirogyra comes from the Latin words spira, meaning spiral, and the Greek word gyra, which means circle. So it's full of spiral circles. And this describes their physical characteristics, which are circles that form in long, thin swirls, as we'll see on the images slide. So here we go. This was the closest we could get with a microscope, which kind of leads to the understanding that it was difficult to tell the exact species that we were dealing with, just because it's hard to see exactly what organelles are where, how are they forming, what is their linkage, what specific mechanisms are they using, and that's what determines one species from another in a genus. But over here, you can tell that they're definitely in the genus Spirogyra, as it is bright green and still green under the microscope, and green even here in a smaller sample. So it's very clear to tell that this is a sample of green algae. You can also see in the microscope that they form chains, that linkage, and that they are likely a spiral. You can't tell from this far away, but you can tell that they're forming long, thin chains, which you can assume would curl. The mode of nutrition for this organism is a photoautotroph, which means they produce their own energy from sunlight using chloroplasts and also fix their own energy within themselves. So they don't rely on any other organism to provide energy for them. The glucose that these organisms use is synthesized via photosynthesis using the equation 6H2O plus 6CO2 plus sunlight yields C6H12O6 plus 6O2. And they're constantly in an energy surplus, being that they have all resources available to them, water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight. These organisms can produce energy indefinitely. They convert energy from sunlight into usable forms, and they gain carbon from the atmosphere to complete photosynthesis. They gain carbon from the atmosphere through stroma. They don't have lungs, they don't breathe, but they have stroma, which are openings that they can determine how large or how small they are. And these openings release water vapor as well as gaseous nutrients. So they can let in carbon dioxide, oxygen, release water vapor, and control how hydrated or dehydrated the plant is, as well as what nutrients it's able to take in. The mode of reproduction for Spirogyra is sexual. They have a zygotic life stage, and that's the only non-haploid part of the life cycle. So they go through a zygotic meiosis because they have to form the zygote to be in this life stage, and then the zygote will eventually split off back to the haploid to satisfy the haplotonic life cycle. And this is the same process of reproduction and the same life cycle seen by many other protists and fungi. So Spirogyra has a clear connection to some other organisms and other phylums. And just looking at this diagram here, we can see that there's a female gamete and a male gamete, and the two tubes will line up side by side, and then the gamete will branch from one to the other to satisfy an empty hole. And after they branch, they'll fuse, so the tubes are now together like Jenga blocks almost. And then that's when they switch from a haploid to a diploid, and the zygospore will grow into its own cell and then grow up, and it'll be a new individual chain, and that's germination. So they can, when they're lined up again, they'll line up next to each other in the next generation, form a bridge, the gamete will transfer, haploid split, fertilization again, line up, gamete transfers, so on and so forth. So it's almost like a ladder, like they're just passing it down. But they can also do this within themselves, where they can line up in themselves like fold. And then one gamete here to one gamete here. So they can reproduce with themselves. They don't need another organism, so to say. And this sample of Spirogyra was harvested from NC A&T State University's farm on March 27, 2022. Spirogyra are found in freshwater ecosystems, which are located dispersively across the globe. Unlike other organisms in this phylum, they are not found in brackish or saltwater ecosystems. Spirogyra is only found in freshwater ecosystems, and they are more or less abundant depending on the available resources, and this abundance is likely uniform. So their distribution is globally dispersive, but locally clumped. So this means that locally, they're going to form those long bands together. They're going to be in those strings, and they're going to be found in a clump of algae, right? If you've ever been to a PetSmart fish tank, you can take out a clump of algae. You never take out just one teeny tiny unicellular organism. They're always in a group. And so they're clumped in their distribution because they might be in one corner of the fish tank, but not another. However, across the globe, because fresh water is located very dispersively, they're located dispersively across the globe. So it depends on the scale that you're looking at to determine their actual distribution. And their abundance, however, is likely uniform. So their abundance is dependent on the availability of resources to perform photosynthesis and allow for growth of the organism, like nitrogen being a large fertilizing material. If that's in the water supply, they'll grow more rapidly because of that nitrogen's present. And this is throughout the water supply. It's dissolved into the water, and because it's dissolved, it's evenly dispersed. So their growth will be uniform. The clump on this side of the lake and the clump on this side of the lake, being that something is dispersed uniformly throughout the water, will grow in the same fashion because they'll have the same resources available to them. So the habitat. Here we see a lake with algae in it, and Spirogyra are always found in freshwater ecosystems, so that explains that. And the habitat must contain carbon dioxide, water, and other macronutrients needed for the survival of all organisms. Just because they're photosynthetic doesn't mean that these organisms don't need their major macros like carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, etc. These organisms access resources through stroma and optimize photosynthesis with spherical chloroplast. So instead of having one small chloroplast, they have a large spherical chloroplast that takes up most of the cell and allows them to perform photosynthesis more rapidly and in greater quantities. They float or sink based on the availability of their resources, and this helps them to be in an optimal location for photosynthesis. If there's light at the surface, they'll float because they'll be producing more oxygen because they'll be producing more energy, and this will allow them to get closer to the sunlight. But if there's less sunlight available, they'll sink, and this won't help them access sunlight, but it does help them access sunlight when there's more available. Spirogyra can also appear sporadically in temporary puddles, rivers, and streams created from excess rainfall. This shows that it has the adaptation to be a very versatile organism and not survive with a lot of nutrients, because the chloroplast, like I said, is very large and round, and this allows it to form photosynthesis even with a little bit of resources because it has a very large supply house to do so. And this adaptation allows them to exist quickly in a puddle and rapidly while also existing in not ideal conditions. A puddle in the street is much less ideal than a pond with plenty of sunlight. The primary ecological role of this organism is to provide energy for other organisms. This organism is also consumed by humans in some locations and used as an antibiotic and antioxidant. So while its ecological role is to be at the bottom of the pyramid, prevent a trophic cascade, provide oxygen to water, and be food for other organisms, it has an extended anthropogenic role for humans. It can help to eliminate biomass in wastewater, and some species of Spirogyra can help to treat cancer. It's the base of the aquatic trophic pyramid and can cause algal blooms and devastate a given ecosystem. An algal bloom is when there's an excess growth of algae due to an abundance of nutrients, and when the algae dies, no more oxygen is being produced at all because all the algae is dead. So all the aquatic organisms in that ecosystem will die. And if this organism was removed from the environment, there would be less food available for all organisms in the ecosystem and likely mass death because there may be no oxygen production. Here's my references.